Clara, awakened by the sound of the clock at 3 in the morning, decided to look through the only window of her apartment facing the cemetery. What she saw was the mystical figure of a German shepherd, pacing frantically around a tombstone. Unable to believe her own eyes, Clara began to question her mental sanity, as she was coming from a marriage and an unexpected loss. But she wouldn't imagine what later that vision of that mysterious dog in the cemetery would mean to her. In Bruges, a city whose tranquil canal waters reflected the timeless beauty of its medieval buildings, Clara and Vincent lived a life that, at first glance, seemed idyllic. Clara, a middle-aged woman with a deep passion for nature and animals, found joy in her daily walks with Arthur, a majestic German shepherd who was more than a pet. He was a bond of unconditional love that united them. Vincent, on the other hand, was a respected prosecutor whose career was on the rise. His long hours at work and frequent travels were sources of pride, but also of growing distance between him and Clara. "Vincent, are you going to be late again tonight?" Clara asked, trying to conceal her disappointment as she prepared dinner in a kitchen illuminated by the last rays of the day. "Yes, I have an important case. I can't avoid it," Vincent replied, without lifting his eyes from the papers in front of him. "You understand, don't you?" Clara nodded, though each nod weighed heavier than the last. "I understand, but Arthur and I miss you." Arthur, lying at Clara's feet, lifted his head upon hearing his name, as if recognizing the sadness in his owner's voice. As the days passed, the emotional distance between Clara and Vincent grew. Vincent's absences were not just physical. They planted seeds of resentment and loneliness in Clara, who found solace only in Arthur's company. Her walks through the wooded trails of Bruges became the refuge of a life that seemed increasingly empty. Tension reached its peak on a cold autumn night when Vincent came home later than usual. Clara was sitting at the dining room table, candlelight illuminating a cold dinner, and the expression of frustration on her face. "We can't go on like this, Vincent. You're always absent, and when you're here, it's like you're somewhere else," Clara poured out, her words laden with accumulated pain. "My work is important, Clara. I do it for us, for our future," Vincent retorted, defensiveness evident in his voice as much as exhaustion in his eyes. "But what about us? What about our present? Arthur and I need you more than a future that never arrives," Clara insisted, her voice choked with emotion. The argument, though not the first, marked a turning point. In the following weeks, the chasm between them only deepened, culminating in a painful decision. Separation was inevitable. The custody battle over Arthur became the battlefield of a broken marriage. For Clara, losing Arthur would mean losing her last link to a life that had once been full of love and happiness. For Vincent, it was a matter of principle, a dispute he was unwilling to concede, even if it meant using his financial power and legal influence. "Arthur must stay with me. I can provide everything he needs," Vincent asserted, his voice cold and determined. "Arthur needs more than just material comfort. He needs love, companionship, something you can't give," Clara responded, her determination matching Vincent's, despite the fear and uncertainty she felt. Vincent did not relinquish Arthur at that moment, instead telling Clara to seek justice to get her dog back. The impact of that decision not only robbed Clara of her beloved companion, but also symbolized the final collapse of her marriage and the life she knew. Stripped of her home, her love, and now her companion, Clara found herself on the brink of a new reality, forced to start anew in a modest apartment facing the cemetery in Bruges. The proximity to memories of the past was now the only consolation for her wounded soul as she faced the challenge of building a new life from the ruins of the old. As the autumn leaves began to cover the sidewalks of Bruges, Clara faced a struggle she never imagined she would face. The custody battle for Arthur was not just a legal matter. It was a battle for her dignity, for her right to love and be loved. Inside the cold courtroom, Clara sat rigidly, watching Vincent from across the room. He seemed confident, backed by a renowned lawyer, while Clara, though determined, struggled to hide her insecurity, accompanied only by a hastily hired lawyer whose worn attire contrasted with the formality of the environment. Mr. Vincent claims to have the financial means and the necessary stability to provide a suitable home for the dog, as well as alleging that Mrs. Clara lacks the emotional and financial conditions to properly care for the animal. the judge declared, his voice echoing through the tense silence of the room. Clara felt a wave of despair, but when her turn came to speak, her voice was firm, though her hands trembled slightly. Arthur is not just a pet to me. He is my family, my companion in the hardest times. Our bond goes beyond material things. It's made of love, care, shared moments that cannot be quantified. Vincent watched, his expression impassive, as Clara continued presenting photos and videos of her walks with Arthur, of intimate moments shared in the tranquility of their now lost home. Friends testified to the special relationship between Clara and Arthur, how one seemed to complete the other. Vincent, in turn, argued about his ability to provide superior care, speaking of plans for professional training for Arthur, of regular visits to the veteran home, Marion at elite clinics, of a spacious yard in his new residence, things that, in his view, Clara could not offer. The legal battle dragged on, each session leaving Clara more exhausted, but no less determined. She fought not only for Arthur, but for everything he represented. The possibility of unconditional love amidst the pain of loss, the hope that justice would prevail over influence and power. In a last desperate attempt to persuade the court, Clara spoke directly to the judge, her words laden with emotion. Losing Arthur would be like losing a part of myself. I ask that you consider not only the financial arguments, but the heart of the matter, where Arthur will truly be loved. After weeks of deliberation, the verdict was announced. Clara held her hands, intertwined so tightly that her knuckles turned white as the judge pronounced the words that would decide her future. Regrettably, I must consider the practical aspects of this case. While I do not question Mrs. Clara's love for Arthur, the law must prioritize the overall well-being of the animal, including its financial and physical safety. Therefore, custody of Arthur is granted to Mr. Vincent. Clara felt as if the ground had opened beneath her feet. The judge's words sounded distant, muffled by the sound of her own heart breaking. Arthur, who had been her beacon of hope in times of storm, would be torn from her life, leaving her to navigate alone in a sea of desolation. The decision not only symbolized the loss of her beloved companion, but also the cruel reality that sometimes love and dedication are not enough to win life's battles. Clara left the courtroom with the weight of defeat on her shoulders, but with a spark of resilience burning in her heart. She knew that somehow she needed to find the strength to move forward, to rebuild her life piece by piece, even without Arthur by her side. In the historic city of Bruges, where every stone and canal seemed to tell stories of bygone eras, Clara found herself at a crossroads of her own life. Arthur's loss had left an immense void, but also a determination to face what lay ahead. Her new home, a modest apartment overlooking the city's ancient cemetery, served as both a constant reminder of loss and a symbol of renewal. The first few weeks were marked by overwhelming loneliness, interrupted only by the sounds of the city and occasional visits from old friends, trying to offer some solace. Clara spent long hours gazing out the window, watching the cemetery where generations of Bruges residents rested, wondering about the lives they had lived and the stories they had left behind. It was on one of those nights under the soft moonlight that Clara first saw the solitary figure of a German shepherd wandering among the tombstones. The sight was so startling that Clara questioned her own sanity. Yet night after night, always at 3 a.m, the dog appeared, its ritualistic behavior leading it always to the same tombstone before disappearing into the morning mist. Moved by curiosity and the desire to escape her own pain, Clara decided to investigate. During the day, she walked to the cemetery, finding the tombstone the dog visited. "Henry, lover of nature and animals," read the inscription, a coincidence that struck deep in Clara's heart. Convinced that there was more to those nightly visits, Clara sought the help of a psychologist, hoping to find a logical explanation. "It could be a manifestation of your grief," the professional suggested, "a way for your subconscious to process the loss and the desire to reunite with Arthur." But Clara was not convinced. There was a tangible reality in the appearances that defied simple explanations. Armed with a flashlight and newfound courage, she decided to confront the mystery head-on. The next night, Clara crossed the silent street toward the cemetery, her heart pounding with anticipation and fear. The early morning mist enveloped the cemetery in an ethereal veil, transforming every tombstone and shadow into figures from another world. Guided by the moonlight, Clara found Henry's tombstone. And there he was, the German shepherd, lying serenely as if on watch. Upon noticing Clara, the dog stood up, his brown eyes meeting hers in a moment of silent understanding. Clara reached out her hand and the dog approached, allowing her to stroke him, a gesture of trust that sealed an unexpected bond. Following the dog, Clara was led to a forgotten part of the cemetery where an abandoned house stood among the centuries-old trees. It was there that the dog had made its refuge, in precarious conditions without food, water, or a home. It was a place marked by loneliness, but also by the resilience and faithful love of animals for their owners. In that moment, Clara knew what she needed to do. The dog, whom she decided to call Henry in honor of the name on the tombstone, needed her as much as she needed him. It was a chance to start over, to fill the void left by Arthur with a new love, a new hope. The challenges of adopting Henry were not small. Clara had to move to a ground-floor apartment to accommodate her new companion, a sacrifice she accepted without hesitation. Together, they began to build a new life, marked by daily walks to the cemetery, where Henry could pay homage to his former owner, and by moments of simple but deeply meaningful joy. As life in Bruges followed its course, with the seasons changing and bringing new colors to the medieval city, Clara and Henry found comfort and companionship in each other. Clara's daily routine now revolved around caring for Henry, and their morning walks to the cemetery became a meditation on life, loss, and renewal. Clara, inspired by Henry's loyalty and strength, began to open up to the world again. She resumed her old passions for painting and gardening, transforming the small space around her ground-floor apartment into a vibrant oasis of flowers and colors. Henry, always by her side, watched with a wise and serene gaze, as if understanding the importance of those moments of creation and beauty. The community of Bruges, initially curious about the woman who had welcomed a dog from the cemetery, began to admire Clara's transformation. Her story, shared in whispers and gentle glances, became an example of compassion and resilience. People who once only waved from afar now stopped to talk, sharing stories and offering words of encouragement. It was on a spring morning when Bruges' trees burst into bloom that Clara received an unexpected visit. Vincent, her ex-husband, carrying the weight of his mistakes and regrets, appeared at her door. He had heard about Clara's new life, and seeing her now, surrounded by flowers and with a smile he hadn't seen in a long time, felt a pang of remorse for everything he had caused. "Clara, I came to apologize," Vincent began hesitantly. "For everything. I was blinded by my own ambition and didn't see what really mattered. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I needed you to know." Clara, surprised by Vincent's visit and words, looked to Henry, seeking in his gaze the wisdom to respond. "Vincent, the road here has been difficult, and there were times when I thought I wouldn't make it. But looking back, I see that every step was necessary to bring me to this moment. Henry taught me about forgiveness and about moving forward, no matter how difficult the path." Vincent moved, nodded in understanding. "You've always been the strongest person I've known, Clara. I'm glad you found your way." Vincent's visit marked a closure for Clara, a last piece that fit into her healing journey. Although some wounds remained, she knew she was ready to move forward, to fully embrace the life she had built with Henry by her side. In the following months, Clara's life flourished in ways she could never have imagined. Her garden, a reflection of the rebirth she had experienced, became a meeting point for neighbors, a place of beauty and peace amidst the city's bustle. Clara, with Henry always by her side, became a beloved figure in Bruges. She offered painting classes in the park, sharing her passion and inspiring others to find their own form of expression. Clara and Henry's story spread, a tale of loss and love, of despair and hope that resonated with many who heard it. The special bond between Clara and Henry and their daily visits to the cemetery became a reminder for the community that, while loss is an inevitable part of life, love and shared memories remain eternal. Together, they symbolize the ability to find light in darkness, to transform pain into something beautiful and meaningful. On a quiet afternoon, as Clara and Henry rested in the shade of an ancient tree, watching children play and couples stroll by, Clara reflected on her journey. The path there had been filled with challenges, but also with moments of profound beauty and connection. She had learned that even in the depths of despair, there is always a spark of hope, a possibility of renewal. Clara and Henry together were not just survivors of their respective journeys of pain, they were emblems of a universal truth. In the heart of loss lies the seed of renewal, waiting only to be nurtured by the courage to move forward and the openness to love again. Bruges, with its tranquil waters and flower-lined paths, had witnessed Clara's transformation from a lost soul to a source of inspiration and love. And as the sun set, painting the sky orange and pink, Clara knew that wherever life took her, she and Henry would face it together, always remembering that after the longest of nights, dawn always comes.